Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on the 11 problems with your root cause analysis process and how to fix them. We're going to go ahead and get started now. And as someone that has chosen to sit through a webinar on root cause analysis with us, I'm sure everyone can agree that effective RCA is crucial to an organization being able to learn from their mistakes and prevent repeat failures from occurring. However, no matter the skill of the facilitator and effectiveness of the method, there can still be troubles that occur in your RCA program. Therefore, this webinar will explore some of the common pain points and roadblocks that can arise in a root cause analysis program. We will also share some practical tips on how to resolve these pain points so that you can execute an effective RCA process that's going to deliver successful results for your organization. This webinar is hosted by ARMS Reliability, who's been delivering RCA and reliability training, consulting, and software solutions since 1995. My name is Austin Powell. I'll be the host of the webinar. I'm joined by our RCA instructor, facilitator, and reliability engineer, Brianna Fuhlman, who will be delivering the webinar. Brianna is a graduate of Texas A&M with a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and is also a certified project manager. She works in our North American headquarters here in Austin, Texas, and has held various roles in reliability, production, process controls, and continuous improvement in the chemical and oil and gas industries. While working for ARMS, she's had the opportunity to train and consult for companies in a variety of other industries as well. Brianna has been a certified Apollo root cause analysis trainer and facilitator since 2017 and contributes articles on the topic, which you can find at the RCA blog at armsreliability.com. Before I turn it over to Brianna to get started, two quick notes. The first is that this webinar will be recorded and be distributed to you all afterwards, so you can share with your colleagues as well and listen to it again if you don't catch everything. And then also at the end, we're going to have some time to answer questions. So as we're going along, feel free to type them into the chat box and we will address them at the end. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and now I'll turn it over to Brianna.
Howdy. So just a little bit of introduction into the 11 problems with your RCA process. The first thing I'm assuming is if you've chosen to attend today, you yourself are a problem solver. But perhaps you're running into some issues. Maybe the process isn't very well defined, or perhaps there's a bit too many investigations to be going through, so you're spending a lot of time trying to solve problems. Maybe you're spending a lot of time coming up with a lot of possible causes. Are you perhaps trying to boil the oceans in the investigations that you're doing? Or is it something like you have a lot of solutions that you're coming up with, but they're not actually being implemented? So what we're going to be going through today is exploring these and other common issues that can arise in a root cause analysis program, and we'll present some practical tips on how to resolve them. Just to give you a high level, this is the list of the 11 most common pain points that we are going to be going through, and we'll also going through how to fix them, so we're not just listing out a bunch of grievances. So the first one we're going to go through is confusion over which process for what. This is something, there are a lot of different tools out there for different issues that you might be having. RCAs themselves are very useful to try and prevent recurrence of past problems. So one of the things that you need to do is know when to use them. So how you can help overcome that is defining what an RCA is going to be used for, when you'll be using it. You need to train people so that they are ready to use the process, and making sure that you have a clear structure and process around RCAs. So now we're already getting into a poll. This should pop up on your screen for you to be able to answer it.
So as you all should see, the first question is, do you feel your RCA process is effective in finding all possible solutions? We'll give you a couple minutes to Select your votes, and then we'll review the results. All right, we are closing the poll now. All right, it looks like the vast majority said no or somewhat. Brianna, how do you see these results comparing to some of the clients and organizations you've worked with?
I'd say that's pretty normal. Lines up well with industry standard between the companies I've gone and worked with ARMS and even in my past experience. So we want to look at how can we make the RCA process more effective at finding all the possible solutions, so then you can choose the best ones. Because this really is the point of a root cause analysis process. A lot of times we walk in and clients or the company that you're working for will say, well, we want to find what the root cause is, but that's not actually the point of doing an RCA. The point is finding effective solutions to make sure that you're not having this incident again. So the next one, which is also a common problem for people, is not having an RCA process exist. So this is if there's not a centralized system, perhaps it's kind of a bit more ad hoc. Oh, this seems like a problem. I guess we should have someone go and investigate it. The problem with an ad hoc system is that other people may see issues and not know who to go communicate with, who to point out that there is something that they need to investigate. And also without any clear triggers to say this is something worth investigating, this is something that's important to us, then you're not actually getting the full value out of investigations. So the next thing that you'd need to do, obviously, to overcome not having that would be creating an RCA process. The first thing behind that is you're going to have to pick a tool. So here at ARMS, we train people on Apollo root cause analysis, but there are quite a few tools out there that can be used for investigations. Once you get training in the method, then you'll need to define a champion for the process. You're going to need to have someone who has buy-in for how the process goes overall. If you're building a process from the ground up, you want to look to see is there something similar that you could use, or is there another plant or another company? Also, if you're building something from the ground up, that's something that ARMS has helped companies with before in the past. And then once you're starting to utilize root cause analysis, you want to make sure that you're sharing, disseminating that information, because this is very important to get buy-in from other people, for people to see the value of the investigation process, because it does take time and energy. You want to make sure that you're sharing the results with them. Another thing that's going to be very important will be establishing the standards. So as far as expectations of what comes out of a root cause analysis, reporting, and also the triggers that help define when you're going to do investigations. And finally, once you've set that process up and have it running for a while, you're going to want to go through and audit the program. This will be something very helpful to have someone outside of the unit or the company come in and give you feedback on how it could be improved. The third issue we want to talk about is no problem management process. Something that's going to be important to a robust process is managing the use of your RCA program, which means that you need to have triggers. These are something that tells you it's time to go and do an investigation. Also, what type of investigation, what size, what amount of resources, and that's something we'll talk about a little bit later. So then the question is, what kind of metrics are you going to use for that? Are you using KPIs given by the business? Are there specific goals and objectives of your unit? So here is a sample trigger system. This is just a simple flow diagram that's saying consider safety, environmental, revenue, cost, customer service, and frequency to help you decide if you should be investigating an incident. One of the things that you want to keep in mind when you're defining these triggers is that they should not be set in stone. So let's take environmental. If you're looking at emissions releases, I'm sure that many people have the goal of zero emissions. But if you're running a plant that's seen quite a few for a long time, doing an investigation on every single release will probably have too much time and energy into it and generate a lot of solutions, but it won't necessarily give people enough time to be implementing those solutions. So instead, you may want to set your trigger for when you're going to do an investigation based on, is there particular equipment that we see issues on the most, or is there a certain release amount that we want to be doing an investigation on? And then, as you have time to complete those investigations, implement the solutions, and see the improvement in your process, then you can change that trigger limit to be a little bit lower. Here is a sample RCA process flow. So once again, it's very simple. You want to make sure you have to have the triggers defined so that when an incident occurs, you recognize that it's something that you might want to investigate. Once you've determined you're going to investigate it, you need to assign a facilitator, pull together the team, complete the investigation, generate the solutions, and then you also want to make sure that you have the report and have it filed so that then later you can go and monitor, are we having the same kind of incidents? In which case, you would go back and look at the reports that were done saying, are they the same causes, which means are we actually generating effective solutions? But that can only happen if you have the entire process carefully set up, you're saving all of the information together, and you're doing an audit on a frequency. So it's critical to have a business process that is robust and visible. You want to make sure that RCAs understand to be a tool and have the individuals in the organization have buy-in to using that tool. So able to see the value that comes from the investigations and the solutions that are completed. Of course, one way to make sure that something gets done right is have it be part of someone's performance criteria. But in reality, it should probably be part of multiple people's. You want it to be part of facilitators as well as the champion and even part of management's performance criteria to ensure that the process is run well. So the next issue we want to look at is a high number of incidents. Just to make sure we're all considering the same thing. An event we're going to define as something that causes an interruption to a process. One of the things you note here is that is very vague. It could be something very small, but that doesn't mean that it's not worthwhile. So while it can be very obvious if you have a production upset that's keeping you down for multiple days, if you're having small upsets that lower your production rate for a couple hours, multiple times throughout the year, then that can add up to eating your lunch. So you want to make sure that you're considering things that might be more of a near miss or something smaller. So here's some tips on how you can overcome that. You need to recognize that minor events can still merit attention. So even if they don't on their own pass your trigger for doing an investigation, it doesn't mean that they're not worthwhile to log. So you want to have some kind of recording system that will monitor even minor downtime. One of the things you can then do is take that data and put it into a Pareto chart. And so this is something that will help you look at your higher frequency items. And then if you need to, you can also adjust your triggers. So you could trigger an investigation based off the frequency of something occurring. Or if you're saying we're having a lot of small incidents and we're not necessarily actually investigating a lot of larger ones, then maybe that also is a sign that you need to lower your trigger criteria for when to do an investigation. The next issue, which is one that I know it can be felt quite commonly by the facilitators, is a limited time for the RCA. So here's some reasons why you may not get enough time to do your RCA. Sometimes it's something where you're in the middle of firefighting and it needs to get done. So it's a checkbox to get done, or it's pencil whipping. Everyone already thinks they know what happened, so we're just writing it all out to get it done. Another thing can be if there's a lot of structure around who is or is not going to be in the investigation, that may mean that you don't always get the right people in the room to have the in-depth investigation that you need. Another one is if you have rules around this is how quickly an investigation needs to be done, or if it's something that's going to be dictated by your production schedule. There's nothing wrong with having an expectation on when an investigation is going to be completed, but you need to also have room for the fact that failure analysis on a particular piece of equipment that was part of the incident could take 28 days. And if you have a 30-day time limit, then expecting a good investigation to be completed in 2 days may not be reasonable. So there needs to be room in the expectations of timing. There's also quite frequently RCA teams, even I've had before a manager come to me and tell me that they knew what caused it and what the solutions were going to be. So if everyone comes into the room and the facilitator does not push back on, here's what we're going to do, and you already have the corrective actions, then you will not be putting the time necessary towards the investigation. And then also, if your triggers are set too low. So if you have a lot of investigations going on, then that means your facilitator and even the individuals who would be included in the team will be too busy running around from one investigation to another to give the full time and attention that it needs on top of the jobs that you're already expecting them to do. The last thing that can be really important, the significance is not well understood. So it's very important when you're getting an investigation team together to make sure that they have buy-in and understanding that this investigation is theirs, and it's up to them to help ensure that this issue or incident does not occur again. Without that buy-in, you will end up with a room full of people who are once again just trying to check the box and say that they've completed the investigation. So now that I've given you a list of why this is a problem, let's talk about how we can overcome it. So this first thing, this is kind of a rule of thumb that we give as far as to make sure that you have set effective triggers. We say you should be doing about 1 investigation per month per facilitator. So you would, of course, then need to be tracking how many investigations are being done per month to ensure that you are meeting that target or close to that target. If you're having a lot more investigations being done than that, then you're going to need to adjust your triggers so that your limits are maybe set a little bit higher. If you're having very few investigations done, so you're a lot lower than that limit, maybe that means that your triggers are set too broadly. And so while I'm not trying to say that you want to constantly be doing investigations, the RCA process can be very valuable to help you with continuous improvement. And so if you're not investigating enough issues, then you won't be getting the full value out of it. Establishing an RCA champion, so someone who has this on their performance review, someone who is helping to drive the process, can also help to ensure that enough time is given. They can help to ensure the quality of what's coming out of the investigation. This last one is training everyone on the intent. That is, of course, going to be to help with ensuring that the whole team has the buy-in, making sure they understand that this is something that's important as far as improving the unit and ensuring the incident does not occur again. And establishing guidelines for when to do different types of analysis. So this is something, it's very important. While a tool like Apollo root cause analysis or Taproot or a Y-tree can be very valuable, it can also take a certain amount of time and resources. And so every kind of event or incident that is happening is not going to require the same amount of time and energy. So making sure that you use the right tool. So if it's something that you want to make sure is documented, you want to make sure is considered and solutions are generated out of, maybe it's a 5Y. And 5Ys are something that you can have facilitated at the production and maintenance level. It doesn't necessarily take the same sending someone off to a training to become an Apollo RCA facilitator. So you want to make sure that you have guidelines to say, there can be different types of analyses depending on the type of incident that occurs. It is, of course, always going to be important to get management support. So as far as when you're trying to define the expectation around timing and making sure that the people who are part of an investigation have the time required to complete the work, that is going to come from the top down. So number 6, going to be looking at ineffective solutions. Say there's 2 different kinds. One is ones that are generated and implemented against a cause, but they're not actually part of the problem. So this is a very important part, looking at an investigation. If you're trying to ensure this incident doesn't happen again, it's not your chance to just throw in every recommendation that the team has of how they might improve the unit. We're looking very specifically at how you can ensure that the individual causes leading to the incident don't happen again. And the other thing you want to be mindful of is solutions that come from the lower end of the hierarchy of control. So how we'd overcome the ineffective solutions, we want to make sure that we find the true causes of the problem. So the first thing is going to be the time and the energy to go through the investigation properly, gathering the evidence needed, and carefully laying out all of the causes that led to the incident. What you're thinking about is that it's a whole intricate layout of dominoes, and each one of them falling is what led to the incident that occurred. So then, when you're coming up with solutions, you're looking very specifically at the dominoes in this pattern and saying, how many of these and which of these can I pull? The more of them that I pull, the less likely it is to see this kind of incident again in the future. Now, if you're putting a solution on something that is not actually part of the causes leading to this incident, you're not helping pull any dominoes out of the chain of events. So here we are onto the second poll. Similar to the last, this should pop up on your screen. So we're looking, I want to ask you guys, how many of your solutions have been implemented?
Poll open for a minute or two again and collect everyone's answers and then review the results. All right, we're wrapping up now. And it looks like the majority of people felt that only 30 to 50% of the solutions have been actually get implemented. Brianna, again, be curious to hear your thoughts on how these answers align with what you've seen in the industries.
Well, I must say I've been fortunate to work for a company where the number is probably between 60 and 90, but not uncommon at all as far as the companies that I've gone to help with, seeing something like 30 to 50. There can be a lot going on, so it's one of the reasons why it's very important to have buy-in at every level for the importance of the investigations being done and therefore the value of the solutions coming out of them. Okay, so the next issue we want to look at are the solutions that don't get implemented. So what is causing that 30 to 50%? We actually have a whole list of barriers here. We could probably do a whole separate webinar on this, and perhaps we could even ask you guys for some of your own barriers that you've seen. But I'm going to go through on a high level some of the ones that we've seen, as well as how to overcome them. So the first one is having the right stakeholders. They haven't been involved from the onset of the study. So this is very important, especially when you're coming out with your solutions or you're trying to make sure things get pushed forward. It can be important. They should either be inside of the investigation, or if you're going to be assigning a solution to them afterwards, or they're individuals that aren't available within the room, then you need to make sure that you can go through the investigation with them, clearly explaining the RCA, and then making it clear how the solutions that come out of it tie into the RCA that was completed. The next is stakeholders don't understand the benefits. So this is something that can be common, either where the stakeholder, someone that you're asking to complete the solution, or the manager of the person you're asking, they don't actually see the benefits of this, whether that's because of turnover or they weren't involved in the initial investigation. They don't understand why this is being done. So this is something where, once again, you want to make sure that you, if they're available, you want to have them in the conversation as far as being part of the investigation, or you want to go through afterwards and make sure when an action item is being assigned to them to complete, you want to make sure they understand where it comes from and what the benefit of it is. It's also very useful, so if the reason that the stakeholder doesn't understand is because this is a solution that has a long timeline. So, this will be implemented during a shutdown. We'll see that within 3 years. Okay, so there's a good chance that perhaps the person in position changes over, a new person's assigned this action item, and they don't know where it comes from. It's very important that you have a system that ties together the solutions out of an incident back to the incident investigation. That way, if someone new comes in, they can recognize where the solution came from and why it's important, or at least know it came from an incident investigation and I need to go ask some more questions. Another barrier is the solution negatively affects others. So my question is then, is it a very good solution? So sometimes we get in a room with the particular group of people in the investigation and we say, okay, well, this will solve our problem. But if we're causing another problem further down the line, we're just setting ourselves up for another investigation. So it's either we need to have the people who would be affected by this solution in the room, or have a discussion with them where they can point out, well, this is going to cause another problem. We can say, can we solve that problem as well? If not, this actually isn't an effective solution. So it's not something we should go forward with. The next, the solution has been passed to another department to progress. So it's always fun when you get to assign solutions to other people. Unfortunately, the other people won't have the same buy-in. So we generally recommend that the individuals who are going to have solutions assigned to them be inside the investigation. And if they aren't a part of the investigation, then you need to make sure, once again, that you're going and having a discussion with them about the incident that occurred, the causes that the solution is tied to, and why it's important, because they need to have buy-in for the work that they're doing and the purpose behind it. Ownership of the RCA is not clear. So this is one of the things that I was talking about. It's important at multiple levels that the RCA program be owned. Obviously, it's going to be assigned to a facilitator, and the facilitator needs to understand their ownership of it, along with all the stakeholders or individuals who are included within the investigation. But then at the next level, you also need to make sure that the manager of the facilitator knows, that why this is important, why the individual needs to spend time with this. And then when you're assigning solutions, you also need to have that same level of ownership between the managers, knowing why solutions or action items are being assigned to the people who work for them, and see the value in that. Because without having all of that driving it forward, then solutions will be dropped and won't actually get implemented in the long run. Next thing is the process for managing solutions is not clearly defined or followed. So this is something very useful, and there are a lot of enterprise solutions that will help you to do this. If you're starting out a process, there's nothing wrong with an Excel sheet as long as the Excel sheet can be locked and solutions can't just be deleted out of it. But it is very important to make sure that you are tracking your solutions. If you're saying that this is an incident you don't want to see again, then it needs to be tracked and brought to people's attention on a frequency to make sure that they're being driven to completion. Another one is the solutions have not been specific enough. So a lot of times as you're going through the investigation, you don't necessarily have the right person in the room to define exactly what the solution should look like. You don't want to necessarily be prescriptive for the final individual who's going to do it, but leaving it in very vague terms. If the individual who will be completing the solution is not in the investigation, or if there's some kind of turnover of who's going to be completing the solution, this can lead to issues in the long run where you're not actually resolving the cause that was identified in your investigation. So you want to make sure that you are very specific with the wording, and once again, that you tie that solution within the system somehow to the investigation and a report that was done so that people can look back and recognize what it is that they're trying to resolve with the solution. Finally, the solutions have been lost in a pile of other urgent or breakdown work. So this is one of the things where it's important to have buy-in from multiple levels, especially management, to help drive, because that will be who defines what you need to work on and what's important. You also want to make sure that you're utilizing a tracking system. That way it stays in front of people on a frequency to say this isn't something that can just be lost on someone's desk. Okay. So we've made it all the way through the list of why your solutions may not be implemented. Now we want to look at not having any kind of solution tracking. So the thing is that the company will spend a lot of time and energy and money having an incident investigation completed, having everyone in the room going through the analysis, any kind of reports that are sent off for. So going through and making sure, but just completing that investigation isn't really the purpose. The purpose is then to come out with solutions and have those implemented. So it's very important that we don't cut off at the end and not actually track our solutions to completion. So this is something, like I mentioned, if you're in the initial stages of designing a process, it can be perfectly fine to have some kind of Excel sheet that's locked or have it in some kind of communal area where it's then reviewed on a frequency by a management level as far as what's being completed. But as you progress, you'll probably want to move towards having some kind of enterprise solution. So there is Apollo RC Pro has this option, but something that will send emails to people saying that they have a solution or action item assigned to them, anything that will then tie it back to the investigation that's completed, something that will send reminders to them or to their management. And then, of course, a process that will also allow for verification when something is said to be completed. So that's part of automating the process, is you can use one of the enterprise solutions that have already been created. The next is resistance to change. I'm sure that it comes as a surprise to everyone on the phone that people in general are going to resist change. This very interesting quote from Mark Twain: "The only person who likes change is a wet baby." So this is just trying to say that the only people who want to change things or want to see things change are someone who's going to get something out of it. So how many times have you seen a solution that it insists on disciplinary action and training options which fail? So this is one thing that's very important going forward into an investigation. In general, in any investigation that I'm leading, and I have actually had multiple ones where it comes part of the cause is the fact that an individual did something wrong. But unless it is malicious intent, unless they were trying to cause a problem, that is not the point of an RCA, because I believe that you all have had an off day. I know that I have. So what you're trying to ensure is making sure that this problem can't happen again. No one else can have an off day that would then lead to this incident. So you want to make sure that when people are going through it, they don't see it as we're doing an investigation, as another witch hunt. They want to pin it on someone. No, the point of this is something happened that is not desired, that we want to make sure doesn't happen again. And helping to have people see that value and have that mindset will once again help them to have more buy-in to the process. Another is how to ensure people are going to get something out of it and quickly. So sometimes, like I mentioned before, you might have solutions where it's going to be a design change to the system, and it could be something that you're not going to be able to implement for 3 years. So you want to make sure there's things, when you're coming out and defining solutions, make sure there's things that can be done up front to get you up and running, things that can be done in the interim until that design change can be installed. So make sure that people have the buy-in to the process, see the value in what's going on, and also that you've defined solutions for each of the time periods so that you're not seeing this incident while you're waiting for a solution to be done. One of the best ways that you can help to overcome people's resistance to change, we'd say, is training. So help people understand, if you're defining a new process or you're trying to change the process and how it's being done, the more people that you can have be a part of investigations, or even if you want to define a simple process like a 5 why that can be done at the production and maintenance level, having more people be a part of the investigations so that they can then see the value coming out of it with the solutions being implemented. But of course, this, like any change, has to be driven from management. So if management doesn't see the value in buy-in, isn't willing to give the time or resources towards it, then you're not going to have the individuals at lower levels bought into the process. So number 10 is no qualified facilitators, and I just want to clarify that a qualified facilitator is not saying a trained facilitator. So there are quite a few courses out there that you can go to and sit through and come out with a piece of paper, but there's a difference between that and actually being qualified to facilitate. And here's some of the ways where you might see that. Unfortunately, it can take some time to be able to recognize that you don't have, or some of your facilitators aren't really well qualified. So if you're not making progress, if you're still seeing the same kind of failures that you've already investigated, or if you're getting feedback from individuals who are part of investigations saying, they didn't listen to me, they stopped it too early, they were just trying to complete the report and get it done because it was assigned to them. Things like this can help you point to the fact that perhaps the facilitators you have aren't qualified. The other thing is if there aren't enough RCAs being done, or if they're not being done very well. So how we can try and fix that, the first off is if you can make sure that the people that are assigned to facilitate have an interest in doing it. So we talk about enlisting volunteers if possible, but either way, even if you struggle to find people who volunteer and want to do this, even having it be part of someone's performance review where they understand that this is an important part of their position, and then having them go through formal training. You want to make sure that you train them at the right level, and also that you have mentoring for them. So someone that provides feedback, whether that's someone who's in the investigations with them, especially initially, someone who has led investigations in the past, being a part of their investigations and being able to give them feedback. Or it could also be the person who's the champion of your RCA process, being involved in the investigations. Another way is having an outside company come in and audit, or having someone outside of the unit or the plant come in to audit your process, audit an investigation, and provide recommendations. And the last pain point we want to talk about is no informal problem-solving process. So we've talked a lot about a very formalized and kind of focused on something similar to an Apollo RCA process. But the thing that can be an issue is if you are using this very formal and what can be a time-intensive process for everything that's occurring, you're going to have a lot of people who are very bogged down and don't necessarily always see the value when they walk into the room to do an investigation. So what we'd recommend is, as your process becomes more mature, you move to a multi-tier process. So this is something I've mentioned before as far as having different tools used to investigate incidents depending on the type of incident. So looking at, for minor events, which we'll call a tier 1, maybe it just needs a quick 5 why, but you still want to have it documented and you want to have clear solutions come out of it. Then you could move up to a tier 2, say maybe this is one person alone investigating or a very small team getting together. It's not going to be multiple days alone in a room, but it is working through making sure that you understood all the causes that led to the incident and then create good solutions from that. And then the last is going to be your major events, tier 3. So this is where you want to make sure you follow the methodology carefully. You have the entire cross-functional team that you need in the room, and out of that should be coming a formalized report and solutions. So in conclusion, perhaps during this webinar, you recognize some familiar scenarios that have created headaches for you in the past. Hopefully, we've given you some helpful advice to ease those pain points. Please remember that root cause analysis is one tool in your toolbox, and it shouldn't be your only tool. There's no sense using a bulldozer when all you really need is a shovel. And as with any tool, it's most helpful when it's kept sharp, well-maintained, and when it's used correctly.
All right, everyone, as we mentioned throughout this, the importance of training and having your team with the capabilities to conduct a proper RCA. We do have some trainings that we host across the country. Would love for any of you to join us in any of these locations. You can email the email here with more questions, or we'll share Brianna's email here at the end of this. We'll now take some time to answer some of the questions that were submitted during this. Feel free to send any more in too, and we'll see if we have time to get to them. All right, the first question here says, you've mentioned the Apollo method a few times throughout this webinar. What are some of the things you find differently about that method?
So I find a lot of value in the method, first in the way that it breaks down causes. So looking at actions and conditions, a lot of times what you look at are going to be the things that change the actions, but the conditions that exist. Frequently, if you can resolve those, you have more effective solutions. Also, the fact that it drives towards having evidence for each individual cause. This helps make sure that there's not a lot of bias in what's being built, or everyone isn't just throwing in everything that they'd like to solve about the plant, but actually looking specifically at what went into the incident.
is of some of these elements, what are ones that can be implemented quickly for some quick wins to get buy-in to the RCA program?
I think some of the first things that you'd want to do would be build a trigger flow chart, so that way you can help define when you're doing investigations. Your initial one, I don't think, has to be very complicated. Just look at what the KPIs are or the goals for your unit are, and use that to help define it. That way you'll start getting some investigations in. And then also making sure you have individuals trained in a particular methodology. So going through, once you're starting to have complete investigations on a frequency, then making sure that everyone's using the same method to go through and investigate them.
Brianna, if you want to click to the next slide, it has your contact info for all the attendees.
Sure.
Great. So any questions about any of this, the slides, anything like that, feel free to reach out to Brianna. She'll be very helpful in assisting you however she can. You can also visit us at our website, submit an inquiry with any questions or anything along those lines. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope you have a great holidays coming up, and you get back to the new year with some great ways to improve your RCA program. Thank you, everyone.